Welcome to the Aerospace Advantage podcast. I'm your host, John Slick Baum. Here on the Aerospace Advantage, we speak with leaders in the DoD, industry, and other subject matter experts to explore the intersection of strategy, operational concepts, technology, and policy when it comes to air and space power. So if you like learning about aerospace power, you are in the right place. To our regular listeners, welcome back. And if it's your first time here, thank you so much for joining us. As a reminder, if you like what you're hearing today, do us a favor and follow our show. Please give us a like and leave a comment so that we can keep charting the trajectories that matter to you most. This week, we are talking about a topic that's generated a lot of buzz in the past few months: counterspace weapons. In his recent paper, Building U.S. Space Force Counterspace Capabilities, an Imperative for America's Defense, our senior fellow for space studies, Charles Galbreath, addresses the need for defensive and offensive counterspace capabilities to deter potential aggressors like China and Russia. He further identifies a set of recommendations to improve the space infrastructure to better prepare for the reality of space as a warfighting domain. This includes foundational elements like how we operate our satellites, how we train our guardians, and how we gain and maintain awareness of activities in the space domain. So today, we are going to discuss these areas and, importantly, what the Space Force and industry are doing to ensure our continued access to space effects and capabilities in the face of growing threats. We've assembled a dynamite collection of experts to provide different perspectives on these topics. Okay, so we are going to have an exciting discussion today. First, we have Colonel Eric Feld, who is the Director of Space Architecture in the Office of the Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Space Acquisition and Integration. And in his role, he looks at what the future architecture should be and identifies what technologies and acquisition efforts the Space Force needs to get in there. So, sir, thanks so much for being here with us today.
Excited to be here with you, Slick.
Awesome. We are also pleased to introduce Matt Fetrow, who is the Director of Strategic Communication for the Space Rapid Capabilities Office, or Space RCO. Matt, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Slick. Great to be here.
Also joining us is Arnie Streland from Northrop Grumman. Arnie, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Slick.
Okay, and finally, we have our very own Charles Galbreath, who I want to congratulate you on your paper. I mean, really a great piece of work, and I'm glad it's been getting all the attention that it deserves from the media, the Hill, and the Pentagon. So really, really excited to have this conversation.
Thanks, Slick. Yeah, it's great to be here and great to be back. And thanks for the panelists here that are joining us for this discussion.
All right, so let's just jump in because we have so much great stuff to talk about. I mean, you all are titans in your industry. And really, Charles, I want to get started with you. So, you can frame for our listeners a bit about your paper and the panel of experts that we have with us here today.
Thanks, Slick. So I think we all know that the threats to our space capabilities are growing, primarily from countries like Russia and China. They have developed programs specifically to target our space capabilities, to deny us that freedom of access. But at the same time, they're also developing their own space capabilities. And if left unchecked, we could actually flip the advantage that we have in space to the adversaries. And that's something that we can't afford to happen. Norms of behavior, increasing resilience, those are all important, but they're insufficient at deterring the adversary from taking the actions that we don't want them to. Which is why having defensive and offensive counter space capabilities is so important. But even more than that, we need to improve our overall architecture and the way we think about warfare in space to make us able to exercise the capabilities that we need. So we need to improve our operations, training, testing capabilities in order to develop the systems and services that we need. Partnership with industry is going to be absolutely critical as the Space Force embarks on this journey. Which is why I'm so excited to have the panel that we have here today. From an architecture, acquisition, and industry perspective, these are some of the great pioneers that we have here in the Space Force. And again, thank you for being here.
Yeah, I mean, what an exciting time, right? I mean, it just harkens back to standing up the United States Air Force, right? I mean, you all are creating this new force that we frankly need, not by our choosing, but our adversaries have decided to weaponize this domain. So I really appreciate you framing that background. Colonel Feld, I really want to turn it over to you. The Space Force recognizes the importance of increasing space resilience and preparing for conflict in space. And we've talked about that before on the Aerospace Advantage. And, it's really a core ingredient in, deterring conflict. So in your role in the architecture integration, what steps are you seeing as the most important to achieving this objective for you?
3 steps come to mind here. Really, the first one is the pivot to the hybrid architecture. By this, I mean especially the emergence of the proliferated low Earth orbit elements to our architecture, which greatly enhance resilience, the addition of commercial and allied and partner elements to the architecture, which also contribute to resilience. Those are happening at a very fast pace by Pentagon standards, and it's exciting to see that. So that pivot is underway, and that pivot is very helpful in moving the Space Force and our capabilities to the right direction. Second step that I see that's really encouraging is the continuous analysis and wargaming that's underway to figure out what we need to buy. It's much more rigorous than anything I've seen previously in my career, and it's much more inclusive of the operators, the acquirers, the labs, industry partners than what I've seen previous in my career. So the operational imperatives were kind of the start of this, but from there it has spawned off into battle schools and exercises and war games that all help us flesh out exactly what things are going to be valuable in deterring this kind of a conflict and which things are less valuable. So that continuous analysis really encouraging. And then the third thing that I see is what I call agile architecting. And so the fact is, no matter how much planning we do, we are facing a peer adversary that makes their own decisions. And that some of their responses are unexpected. They're on the threat side. Some of the technology surprises can be unexpected, things we couldn't plan for ahead of time. And we have a very dynamic commercial industry available now that is going to offer goods and services that we can't envision today. So whatever architecture we come up with, it needs to be agile and able to quickly adapt to those unexpected things that are happening. Calvelli's 9 tenets are the way in which we're implementing that agile architecture to make sure that we can quickly respond. So those 3 steps have been really encouraging to me in the architecting role as we move towards resiliency.
I want to just hop into one thing that you said, which is really interesting. Just by virtue of the domain that we're talking about, we are instantly with a peer adversary, right? Because obviously folks that can put items into space are going to be at a technological equivalency as the United States. So, that is like a level playing field that we need to acknowledge as we begin thinking about warfighting in this domain. So I really just wanted to point that out for the audience because you really made that clear and we haven't discussed that yet. I want to switch over to Matt here because there's been a lot of press about the Space Rapid Capabilities Office, or RCO for short, as we mentioned earlier. And you've recently put 3 payloads into orbit. There are many other acquisition efforts in the Space RCO that's getting started. And Space RCO seems to be living up to its name and moving out rapidly, really to advance space capabilities. So can you talk to the urgency of the issues that you're working and the progress that you're making?
Yeah, of course. Thanks. There's a lot to unpack there. So Space RCO is, of course, one of 3 acquisition organizations within the Space Force and really specialize in getting after those first of systems and delivering that capability to the Space Force. So in terms of urgency, we've been discussing that already. Even though rapid is in our name, we're really moving out on programs to stay ahead of threats, right? They're moving out quickly and we need to be even faster. In terms of progress, we actually have had some successes, numerous ones, and we've been successful when we've done a couple, 3 or 4 things, right? We've been successful in part by working with industry early and often. We've been super successful when we've scoped our programs carefully. Another one of Honorable Calvelli's tenets, essentially, making sure the requirements are just right, and the industry can actually provide against those requirements. We also have been working really hard to work with all of the U.S. Space Force and the DoD partners that we need to work with to actually field capability, right? We're the systems acquirers, but there's a tremendous amount of effort that goes into the training and the operator work and everything else to make the system a true capability for the Space Force. And while those aren't all our role, we work, early with all those partners as programs are started, and that has really helped us field capabilities. And then finally, disciplined program execution. Even with all those things, space is hard. Going rapid in space is equally hard. And so we've had to really be holding ourselves accountable, holding our vendors accountable on the acquisition side. And I guess I'll just finish with, you mentioned a couple of our programs that we've talked about lately. One is our space payloads that we launched back in January. We had 2 threat awareness sensors that were launched, and a cryptic payload as well, a hardware encryption device. And we're really proud to get those done about 3 years from the start of acquisition to launch, and even more excited that we've completed testing on those now. Just about 6 months in, we were able to do multiple rounds of testing of each of those payloads, and they're operating very, very well. And then finally, I think the most important part is we actually have production contracts available to us now, where we're purchasing copies of those payloads, and we're providing them to Space Force programs that need that kind of awareness and crypto for their own high value assets. And so I think that's really, really exciting. In my long career in acquisition, we might have relied on the acquisition center to go off and do their own contracts, but we covered that as part of our program because it is just one Space Force that we're working for here. So long answer, but I think we are starting to make some progress.
Yeah, it really sounds like it, and appreciate the fact that you point out, trying to be rapid in the acquisition world is tough enough as it is, but to do it in space is an even greater challenge. So kudos to you all for the hard work. Arnie, I want to get you in here as well, because, Charles mentions in his paper really highlighting the need for tight government and industry partners. And I mean, it all comes down to delivering results that speak to operational requirements, and guessing, given that most of the industry works in many domains, that they'll be able to apply some of their lessons learned from challenges that we see on Earth as they look at doing space activities, especially when it comes to, offensive and defensive thinking. So from your perspective at Northrop, talk to us about strengths of the partnerships, but what areas also exist where you'd like to see some progress?
Yes, Slick, thank you. The whole partnership point is really important and something that deserves emphasis. Certainly we at Northrop Grumman, and I believe all our competitor mates across industry, agree that government industry partnership is key for mission success. You need that teamwork, that dialogue to work through the challenges of delivering these kind of complex capabilities in a limited amount of time for a limited amount of budget. When we look across all the domains, and we're fortunate, we have business across all the different domains with all the services plus the IC. The first thing that really comes to mind as far as how we can help work with our space customers is connect the dots for them. To accomplish a space mission, in many cases, it's all about getting data from some sensor in space out to some customer, some user, some warfighter somewhere. And some of that goes to Space Force elements, but it also goes to Army vehicles, Navy ships, Marine Tactical Operations Center, Air Force aircraft, you name it. So we have the unique position, and not just in our company, but other elements of industry, to look across all these programs and help keep our customers informed about where the data needs to go, where it needs to be, how it can best be suited to ultimately accomplish whatever the relevant space mission is. And that gives us a strong advantage looking across, because some of our customers, they often don't have that perspective because they don't have the bandwidth, and in some cases they don't have the security clearance to see all the parts that we do. So when you look at the mission kill chains, the mission threads that Colonel Phelps and others are working on as part of their architecture, I think we in industry writ large are in a good position to help our customers work through those challenges. Looking to the future, I think the biggest thing we can do is work on that information sharing. I mentioned security earlier. Security is a big part of any space mission or any military mission for that matter, whether you're talking about security access, computer networks, facilities, but that often in the past has been a barrier or a hindrance to timely progress on programs. We're really pleased with the emphasis the Space Force leaders like Lieutenant General Gutlein at Space Systems Command have been putting to improve those processes. We look forward to working with them to make that even better, make the process run smoother and help everyone together be more effective. And one kind of piece of that, Colonel Felt mentioned earlier, alluded to wargaming. Wargaming is an essential part of planning and architecting, and the more that data can be shared with industry, the better industry can help solve problems, help answer questions, help deliver timely capability. So the more that data can be shared, and it's being shared today from some of the efforts that are going on. There's some really good data sharing. There's opportunities to expand that, to improve that in the future. So anything that can be done there to continue that and expand that data sharing with industry, it just strengthens and fosters that teamwork that Charles noted is so essential for mission success.
Yeah, I cannot agree more. And I appreciate that comment there. I want to open this next question to everybody. And it's the topic of satellite operations. Our legacy capabilities were built when, space just wasn't contested. And things are obviously way different now. One of the major reasons why we even have a Space Force. So we're in a position where we've got a lot of capabilities on orbit, and they have to operate under radically different assumptions, and they need to adapt. So, the analogy we've kind of kicked around is it's like taking the family station wagon out and then saying, okay, now you need to be a Humvee. So how can we get over this disconnect? And I guess we can get started with Charles first.
I talked about it in the paper, the way that we do satellite operations that has gaps in contact and just sporadic contact really with our satellites. It can't fly in a contested environment. We need to have assured access to all of our systems so that we can respond to threats as they materialize. And if we take it another step further and actually have weapons in space, the ability to have positive control over those weapon systems is going to be absolutely critical. We can't allow a weapon system in space to fall victim to a cyber attack or let someone else take over the command and control capabilities of it. So we have to have positive control over those assets. And that's going to require a significant increase in our satellite operations capabilities over what we've traditionally had.
So my thought there is don't focus on the station wagon, at least at first. That's the hardware. But let's first focus on the people. We've got tremendous, innovative guardians that are very able to come up with new tactics, techniques, and procedures very quickly. We need to empower them and give them the material that they need. And so if they need a Humvee, let's buy them a Humvee rather than trying to adapt our station wagon. One example of that, how that plays out in the architecture world is, we've traditionally had a few large satellites in GEO, and our operators have been using those. Well, it turns out the best thing we can do in many cases to protect those GEO assets is to build a proliferated LEO layer of the architecture, because it makes them much less likely to be targeted. Our Guardians are ready and very eager to embrace those new tools that we need to give them. And I think we just need to get out there and buy the tools that they need and set them free.
Well, Carol felt that's great for me to hear, because on the acquisition side, that's sort of my response. Let's go ahead and move out on getting the Humvee put together. So at Space RCO, we've got a couple programs getting after that. One is called SCAR. It's basically delivering new phased array ground antennas to augment the current Space Force satellite control network. That program's going well. They're on track to deliver, knock on wood, the first system in 2025. And actually, we've got a vendor subscale demonstration of that antenna planned just here in late August. So the SCAR antenna systems, in addition to adding capacity, right, bandwidth to the SCN, also added lots of communication flexibility. So these antennas can contact numerous satellites at a time, almost instantaneously. And the whole system is also relocatable. Each unit's relocatable, which would allow the Space Force to place communications capacity where it's needed, right? And that actually may change over time. And so that flexibility is key. And then on the other side, right, you've got to have software to go with all this communications bandwidth, right? So we've got a new program that we stood up with the Space Systems Command, a joint program office, called R2C2, and it's all about delivering ground tactical command and control capabilities to support these future dynamic space operations that we expect our spacecraft and the military to have. And so R2C2 will support different satellites, different mission partners that will come to us, right? And we'll be able to provide to the operator a common interface, common tools and whatnot, so they can operate these types of satellites in the future much more effectively and much more rapidly to get after some of those decisions that they need to make.
Thing I think I would add is if you talk to some of the owner operators over the years, they'll probably tell you that the environment they work in is maybe a little bit more challenging than just operating the family wagon. So there's things that they're doing now and can do in the future that could contribute to what inputs the other panelists shared there. From our perspective, Northrop Grumman has delivered over 50 different commercial geocom satellites to a variety of customers. And one of the things they all have in common is on a daily basis, these operators face radio frequency interference. Now, in wartime, you would call that jamming. In what is today peacetime for most of them, that interference comes by mistakes. Someone points a ground antenna in the wrong place at the wrong time, uses the wrong frequency. The results are, however, the same as intentional jamming. You're not getting your mission done. You're not generating revenue. So because of this, there's companies out there that can geolocate sources of interference, share that data with the owner operators, and help them resolve those issues promptly. So that you see that kind of example, and they're already doing things to operate in an RF contested environment. The other things the operators have in common is they do a good job of knowing where their satellites are, where they're physically located through their own tracking capabilities, through programs like ComSpock. They have a good knowledge of where their systems are and what's going on immediately around them. So you take that together, and a typical owner-operator really has a decent idea of what the RF environment is like around their vehicles and what the physical environment is like. Where are they at? What's around them? So the next phase of that is, can they share that with the Space Force in a timely manner? And some of that's happening today. You have some owner-operators already connected with the Space Force through the commercial integration cell at the CSPOC. So you have information available to these owner-operators. You have the ability for them to share it with the Space Force in a timely manner. So that gives you, I think, a good foundation to build on as you look for these satellites to need to operate in a future, more contested environment.
Yeah, and that's a great segue for my next question. One of the things I think about as a fighter pilot, if I'm going into an AOR, likely I am not having to worry about civilian traffic. I just want to make sure that I know who's a friend and who's a foe. And likely if somebody's in front of my 3-9 line on an initial push, they're probably not a good guy or not a civilian flying around in a battle space. So, when it comes to command and control or responding to threats, nothing is possible without the domain awareness that we're going to need to track and identify threats. And we also need to characterize them, identify their weaknesses and limitations, and provide advanced warning. So given how large the space domain is obviously a huge challenge. So the question is our current architecture and the related systems up to this challenge?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, as Charles notes in his paper, there's still work to go. But if you look across all the different space acquisition agencies, there's a lot of effort going on to address this issue right now, because space domain awareness is foundational to anything else you do: offensive counterspace, defensive counterspace. It all starts with space domain awareness. If you look at what we do at Northrop Grumman, we support upgrades and enhancements to the existing ground-based optical and radar systems, while also serving as the prime contractor for GSAP and the dark radar system. So collectively, just those sensors represent a wealth of data that some of it can be used today. More of it's going to be available in the future to build a better SDA site picture. Then, in addition to those government procured systems, you have an increasing wealth of commercial space domain awareness data provided by a variety of small and medium-sized companies that have systems deployed around the world. And the key, of course, is integrating all this data, government data, commercial data, all together in a timely fashion to give the warfighters that single, accurate space domain awareness picture they need. And there you've got folks like Barbara Golf at Space Systems Command spearheading the procurement integration of that commercial data into a picture, single picture for government use. And you have efforts at SSC to move some of the data processing beyond the heritage SPADOC and CaveNet systems that Charles mentions in his paper. So there is still work to go, but there's a lot of great work happening today to close those gaps, address those limitations, and give our warfighters the mission capability they need.
Yeah, so as Arnie is describing, the current architecture is definitely the best in the world, but it needs to expand to include maybe more focus on tactical hazard and threat awareness. So, this might include like new kinds of sensors that measure the actual threat phenomenology and sort of threatening behaviors more directly. It could be, as we've talked about, interference in the electromagnetic spectrum. It could be proximity, it could be other things. I think the architecture also needs to include improved aggregation and processing of existing and future data. Again, how do we find the threats we're looking for in a timely fashion and sort of weed out all the chaff of objects, which are important, but might, just as well be gotten to, through some other means or at a different time frame. And then finally, we might actually need a larger concentration of threat awareness sensors in space on satellites to provide local and consistent coverage. So we're really interested in thinking about the problem differently. Threat awareness is one of the topics of this year's Hyperspace Challenge. I wanted to bring that up. We're working with AFRL through this fall cohort. It's kind of an industry and government partnership accelerator. And Space RCO is participating as a problem sponsor this year in large part so we can better understand what innovation might have for awareness of space threats, what might be out there in the commercial industry that we could leverage in the future.
So Arnie and Matt, you hit on one of my key talking points, and that is that all of the sensor data is good, but unless we actually make sense of that sensor data, we're really not helping ourselves. So the ability to ingest the government, the commercial, allied capabilities and their sensor data into one site picture that weeds through the chaff and finds the wheat and says, okay, this is the threat you have to be worried about, or these are the events that you need to be taking a look at. That's what's really important. So the ability to, in a digital sense, collect all that information, make sense of it, allow AI and ML algorithms to do their work so that you don't have to have a human sorting through piles and piles and piles of data. Let's make our data accessible to those algorithms so that we can get an advantage from this emerging technology.
So the architecture vision that we're pursuing here is to be able to know everything of interest everywhere, all the time, in real time. When I look at it through those 4 parameters, I see a lot of gaps in our space situational awareness capabilities. So we have a long ways to go. We do have all of the basic elements there, but we need to build out the architecture to make sure that we can answer those questions and know where to focus. So it isn't we don't have enough sensors, first of all, because if you don't even have a sensor, then no matter what you feed into your data processing algorithm, you're going to end up with garbage. And just because there's data falling on the floor doesn't mean that you don't have that you don't need more sensors, because you might not be collecting the right data that you need. So there is a need for more sensors, terrestrial and in orbit. There's a need for sensors in more locations. We talked about like cislunar space as an emerging area where we're going to need to maintain space domain awareness because there's activity there that could be of interest to us. We need to have we need to have sensors that we can communicate with all the time and that are observing everything everywhere all the time. So that's a lot of gaps just on the sensing side. And then that all has to be pulled together with data transport, synthesized using appropriate tools such as AI, ML, and then presented to the operator, because of course we don't have thousands of operators that can be manually processing all this data. So we do, in order to enable and deter conflict in space, we need to fill these space domain awareness gaps.
Okay, so I want to expand on the point about commercial and international sensors. It's clear that the Space Force is very serious about integrating commercial and international capabilities for all missions, as part of the larger architecture. So let's talk about why this is so critical and how we can accelerate, and, if there's any limits or constraining factors that our listeners should understand.
So on the acquisition side, of course, we need to include, more commercial companies, international solutions in our thinking, right, when we're going after fielding systems. That's one of the reasons, again, Space RCO is participating in the Hyperspace Challenge, is to look out at new companies, different companies where we might not have been focusing earlier, and to see what's out there. You talk about constraints, right? So for us, the challenge, if you will, is as an acquisition organization looking to deliver capability, particularly in a military organization, it's not always easy to figure out how can you take advantage of those first of products and services that companies might have. So on the services side, I would not have expected at first to see a wealth of commercial services applicable to our current focus, which is protecting space assets. But as you guys know, we're now seeing companies pursuing all sorts of things that are relevant, like refueling, on-orbit servicing, on-orbit awareness as a service. And even some companies are now talking about offering protection services now, which is just amazing. And then on the products and side, the more hardware focused side, we're seeing commercial offer all sorts of market-driven solutions, products and technologies that might meet the Space Force's needs. We're also interested in companies that maybe haven't even recognized or decided to go into the space market yet. And so as part of hyperspace, we're looking at aligned markets that might have products that we could use for space protection, or at least aligned to that. Things like the automotive industry or mobility solutions in general, the manufacturing and even mining solutions. Could some of those products be actually used in the future for some sort of space protection solution? So that's where our head is, but that includes international and commercial companies both.
So from an architecture perspective, we can't deter China without commercial and international partners. That is clear. And the reason is that it is the only way we can get fast capabilities fielded quickly and get the innovation rapidly fielded that we need. It's the only way we can get the resilience that we need from kinetic and jamming and cyber threats. The reason you get resilience is that if you have many different ways to get the mission done and one of them is threatened, then you have the other ways to accomplish the mission. And so these commercial and international capabilities, when they're added to the architecture, greatly contribute to all three of those forms of resilience. And then that leads to better deterrence. So we are absolutely all about bringing commercial and international capabilities into the architecture to the maximum extent possible. And it really depends on mission area, whether there are viable commercial offerings in that area and what are the dependencies and threats that need to be thought through. There really are not any significant legal or policy barriers that we have found in most of the mission areas. The major constraints are cultural. This is kind of new for the Space Force to be embracing these commercial capabilities to the extent that we're talking about now. I think the other services can show us some examples of where they've been able to take commercial capabilities and integrate them into their operations very effectively. There's some process limitations and constraints that we are working through, and I think that's just a normal part of bringing a new element into the architecture, and some funding issues, which are a normal part of the POM processes that we discuss. So absolutely essential that we do it. There are some constraints, but that's definitely the future is going to involve more commercial and international elements of the architecture.
I think we agree, and all of industry would agree, that commercial and international both have key places as part of a resilient space architecture. A couple of thoughts to share. If you start with commercial, I think that the key there is, especially when you think of things like space domain awareness data, is working to expand on the kind of commercial integration relationships that Barbara Golf and her team are building, and strengthen those business cases so that it's easier for some of these companies to get longer term agreements so they can continue to invest, innovate, and supply the kind of data you need. So that's just a matter of working the business case, the acquisition approach to make that possible. When you look at international, there's great examples of success today in international partnerships. We at Northrop Grumman are getting ready to launch 2 satellites for Space Norway that will also be flying 2 military communications payloads, frequency hopped EHF payloads to communicate with deployed forces over the polar regions that we built as well. So that partnership of flying the EPSR payload on Space Norway, that's an example of how you can put U.S. systems together with international systems. There's ability for international partners to bring other ideas and other capabilities in. The key thing there to focus on is, especially when you're talking about U.S. industry working with international companies and international governments, is licensing. And Ms. Deanna Riles and her team at SSC International Affairs are really helping with that. It's just a matter of working through those agreements, those licensing, so that we can have that kind of communications, open communications, that we talked about earlier as being so important between U.S. government and industry. We've got to establish that between international industry, U.S. industry, and U.S. and international government. So all those elements can work together to deliver that resilient mission capability that everyone needs.
Yeah, I'm really excited about the prospect of integrating commercial and international partners into the overall architecture, even more than we have, as the previous guests have talked about. That's absolutely exciting. I think it's important as we move forward that we all understand what the limits and constraints are for each other. You need to know going into a conflict whether or not you're going to be able to rely on that communications platform throughout the duration of the conflict, or if there's a tripwire that they're going to pull their support for one reason or another. So I think the war games that Colonel Felt mentioned earlier, if we can incorporate all of those partners into those war games to find out where their thresholds are, where their breakpoints are, so that we can go in eyes wide open about what the terms and conditions are before we get into conflict, we're all going to be able to cooperate a lot better and deliver the capabilities that the warfighters need. So I think that's an important element that we need to continue to grow.
I could not agree more. One of the things that I wanted to touch upon here, a lot of comments here about the potential capability to tap into, the commercial side. So is there a particular technology or capability that you're most excited or intrigued by, especially, in the context of how it can improve the security of space capabilities?
Well, there is a lot of commercial innovation to get excited about, but I think I am most intrigued by the range of on-orbit servicing and manufacturing capabilities being pursued by commercial, and also the pace at which they're making progress in those areas. And so again, if you look at a future Space Force architecture that includes dynamic space operations, frequently moving satellites, basically using them up, wearing them out, I could see where those on-orbit servicing and manufacturing capabilities could really help out, could help out the Space Force.
Totally agree that on-orbit servicing is some of the low-hanging fruit. I also, from the architecture perspective, see low-hanging fruit in comm. Basically, as we build out the internet in space or the extranet, and especially all the proliferated LEO comm systems that are emerging today, we've got terabits of capacity that are much more than we've had before in the comm arena. In space domain awareness, we talked about the gaps there and the potential opportunities for commercial to help fill those. Terrestrial and space weather seems like something that can be well done by industry and commercial providers. And then commercial augmentation of the satellite control network or antenna as a service. That's the low-hanging fruit that we've identified through our architecture studies on commercial. I do think I should say what commercial is. There is some debate and disagreement about what it is, but our definition of commercial really comes from the DoD instructions, and it means that there is a marketplace out there of buyers and sellers of a good or service that does not depend upon the United States government, and especially not as the only customer. And so when that exists, that is what we call a commercial good and service. And when we can buy it without significant modifications, that's what we're calling a commercial good and service.
So I would certainly agree in the area of on-orbit servicing that both Matt and Colonel Felt highlighted. And I would be remiss if I didn't highlight, when we talked about proven capability with an existing market, that really defines well our Space Logistics LLC subsidiary and their mission extension vehicles. We have 2 mission extension vehicles in orbit today, providing 24/7 life extension to 2 Intel satellites that were running low on fuel. They were never designed to be serviced, but we went up, we docked our 2 vehicles with them, and they're operating successfully, getting their mission done today. Soon we'll have the next generation of space logistics vehicles up there that includes our mission robotics vehicle and mission extension pods that can not only perform the life extension that we do today, but also perform on-orbit repairs or even add mission capabilities. So that's an example of commercial innovation that's happening right now to commercial customers, and we're excited to continue to demonstrate that capability and make that available also to the government so they can take advantage of this commercial investment.
Yeah, when I think about the commercial capabilities that are out there, I feel like a kid in a candy store because there's so many areas that they're really moving the ball forward with, and it's exciting. We'll make it a clean sweep across the panel here. I agree, on-orbit servicing is one of those really exciting areas and can be a game changer for how the U.S. Space Force looks at its space operations in the future. I'm always excited about innovations in launch. We've seen some of the dramatic changes in the way we look at things with the ability to put up a proliferated LEO constellation because of changes to launch. So I think there's some other potential exciting areas to be had there. And of course, as we move out to cislunar space, that's a partnership with civil, of course, and international partners, but there's also a lot of commercial activities that are headed in that direction too. And so the way that the Space Force can partner with those and help shape those and learn from those, I think is also very exciting.
Yeah, all great comments, guys. I just really can't say thanks enough for being here. So changing up the way that we normally would sign off with the normal, thanks for having me, goodbye. I want to allow you guys just to really leave us with a good parting shot or thought that you have as you close out. Again, my thanks to you and Charles. Congratulations again on the paper, and what an amazing panel you put together. So thanks for being on the Aerospace Advantage. So I'd like to go ahead and get started with Charles, and then we'll go down the list.
Thanks, Slick. I appreciate that. And my thanks to the panel as well. For the audience, this is not a done deal, right? This is not a solution that is just waiting to be implemented. There's a lot of intellectual work that has to be done to figure out exactly what we need to do. The theory of competitive endurance is great, but we need to refine that. We need to expand our thoughts about what that is. Logistics clearly might fit into that as we think about the endurance piece of competitive endurance. So don't think that we've got the answers. We need to just keep pressing forward.
Charles, as I read your paper, I thought about it in the context of General Saltzman competitive endurance theory as well. And he has challenged us to work on that, debate that, refine that. And your paper takes a huge step forward in that regard. And his 3 tenets are the things we've talked about today. Avoiding operational surprise. That all boils down to good space domain awareness of what's going on there. Denying first mover advantage. That's what we're doing with the hybrid architecture and the proliferated LEO parts of it, especially. And then responsible counterspace campaigning. That's all about how we defend our space capabilities as well as protect our joint forces from space-enabled attack. So his theory that he laid out there is a great framework in which your paper fits, and it really makes some strong steps forward. So thanks for the opportunity to be here today, and thanks for writing the paper.
Well, thanks to the Mitchell Institute for having me on today. It's just been a great conversation. I guess I did want to do one shameless plug for the fall cohort that AFRL is putting on. I mentioned called Hyperspace Challenge. I'd like to encourage companies that are pursuing products or services that might some way help us in space protection. Please take a look at what we're offering. Look at the cohort on hyperspacechallenge.com. And again, thanks again.
Yeah, thank you as well. Thank you to Slick. Thanks to the Mitchell Institute and Charles for a great paper and for putting this all together. And the thing that struck me as I was reading the paper and then participating in this discussion is, not long ago, discussions like this only happened in SCIFs. A big shout out to the Mitchell Institute and Charles in particular for bringing this whole discussion into the public realm where it needs to be to address the resource challenges, the policy challenges, the acquisitions ahead. As Charles said, this is not a done deal. So it's going to take a lot of work by government, by industry, all working together to maintain that space superiority that our warfighters depend on. So thanks again for the opportunity, and thank you to Mitchell Institute and again to Charles for bringing this important discussion into the public realm.
With that, I'd like to extend a big thank you to our guests for joining in today's discussion. I'd also like to extend a big thank you to our listeners for your continued support and for tuning in to today's show. If you like what you've heard today, don't forget to hit that like button and follow or subscribe to the Aerospace Advantage. You can also leave a comment to let us know what you think about our show or areas you think we should explore further. As always, you can join in on the conversation by following the Mitchell Institute on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn, and you can always find us at mitchellaerospacepower.org. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Stay safe and check 6.